Awesome. So we can get started. It's 5 after. Yeah, let's get rocking and rolling. Very happy, very happy to be here. Of course, really happy to get the Sports Tableau user group launched and kicked off. So I got to thank everyone for coming along. Of course, I got to thank our co-leads who's helped make this possible. And of course, thank you to our guest who will eventually present something wicked awesome. So yeah, thank you again. So as everyone knows, this is Tableau Sports user group. This is our first one. I believe there was one previously, but it has therefore disbanded, and why we have started our very own. So yeah, very happy to get going. Whoops. There we go. So agenda for today, we're going to do some co-lead introductions and also sort of let everyone know what we're about. So at least people are familiar with who we are, and they could reach out to us whenever, wherever. We're also going to do a Q&A with Mo Wootten, who's one of our co-leads as well. And he has a lot of experience working in professional level of sports, specifically in the UK. I think it's the UK Sports Institute. Mo, correct me if I'm wrong.
Spot on.
Awesome, cool. And then last but not least, for the main event, pun totally intended, we have a wonderful designer, Maggie Eng, who works with two co-leads, myself as well as Ryan Suarez at Deloitte Canada, and how design plays such an important part with data visualization. So let's get going. Awesome. So to introduce myself, my name is Stephen Scott, work at Deloitte Canada, specifically doing data visualization, work a lot in Tableau, and occasionally the other visualization tool that I will not use because it's a Tableau event. But also have lots of past experience working in professional sports. I've worked at companies like SportLogic, who are big into hockey. I've also worked at the Canadian Premier League as well, so working with lots of different clubs and recruitment and so on and so forth. And so I'm based in Montreal, Canada. I'm currently obsessed with cycling, but previously obviously love soccer and tennis as well. And I have a soft spot for Matthew Van Der Poel as well as Arsene Wenger as well. So, and just a little fun facts about me. I also, of course, love to share some work on Tableau Public. So funnily enough, 3 out of these 4 visits are all about cycling because the Tour de France recently happened. And then the top left was my journey of getting more into cycling last year. And then, of course, doing a couple visualizations on Twitter around time trials down here, as well as some soccer visualizations as well. So by all means, follow me on Twitter, send me a message. I'm always happy to check that out, and I'm pretty responsive as well. So, and before we introduce everyone else, what I really wanted to do is just lay the foundation of what we're really trying to do here in the Sports TUG. And so ultimately, high level, it's really to increase access to the sports industry by sharing our passion and insights within the Tableau sports community. And so that can mean a lot of things, but ultimately to me, we can show features, we can show, ways of doing this, that, and the other, but ultimately what I'm really excited about sharing with everyone is really how people think in the sports industry and how they solve problems, and also showcasing what sort of makes sports very unique. And so again, that really starts with, in my opinion, sharing that domain knowledge. And like I said, it's really what makes sports unique. So for example, the challenges that people in sports face, a lot of the randomness that people in sports face, whether it's fans being a little bit fickle, or even someone not putting the ball in the back of the net just because they're unlucky. And of course, everyone here is a huge sports fan, I'm assuming, of course, at different levels of passion and things like that. But ultimately, I can't think of another industry where there's a huge amount of global passion towards an industry and what makes it very, very unique. And so, for example, what I mean by the challenges is, so for example, So I had the privilege of working with a racing car team. And so going into it, I didn't know a lot about the sort of racing and strategy and things like that, but they tasked us with coming up with race strategy to help them win races or at least do better. And so the point was, I came in not knowing anything, but literally after a couple meetings with them, they told me, they sort of explained to me how they thought about racing and how we can go about thinking about it differently. So ultimately, understanding their challenges and understanding how they think about the sport is really what I want to showcase with the Sports TUG. So for example, and just to explain the visualization, because you're probably just looking at a stacked bar chart, these are sort of just pit and tire strategies over the years. Red is sort of the soft tire, black is the hard tire, which has different purposes, and the white lines are just pit stops. Of course, these are pit stops too, but just to show that difference and how it sort of works. So again, understanding those challenges. And then the other thing, of course, as we all know, especially in soccer, I just cherry picked this, is that there's a lot of randomness, and that forces people to mitigate a lot of problems, or at least do their best to mitigate that randomness. And what better to explain it than a model that's purely probabilistic, right? So all XG models are probabilistic, but again, it's what makes sports unique. And lastly, as we know, sports has a huge amount of passion, and we'll try and bring that out as well. I cherry-picked this image from an article about how the Detroit Lions actually use data to understand their fans a bit better, especially from an experience perspective. So they found out that there was one gate in particular that had over 50% of the fans showing up to their game at that specific gate. So that created a huge backlog, and ultimately understanding that, they tried to fix it, and it actually led to even more attendance once they did fix it, which was really great and really interesting. So again, those challenges, the randomness, as well as this passion overall. So hopefully that makes sense. I know I'm very excited to get started. And I believe next is, I'll hand it off to Ryan, which is another one of our co-leads who I am happy to say that I work with them on a daily basis. So over to you, Ryan.
Yep. Thanks, Stephen. Hey, everyone. It's great to see so many people from different parts of the world joining us on this call. We are a global user group, so it's great to see people from Africa, UK, Europe, and even North America here. So welcome everyone. My name is Ryan Suarez. Also work in visual analytics at Deloitte Canada, located in Toronto. Some of my favorite sports to play and watch are basketball, tennis, and golf. And favorite athlete all time is Kobe Bryant. Really love his mentality and approach to pro sports. So I've never worked in sports like Steven and Mo have, but it's a big interest and a big passion of mine. And one way I express that is through my data visualizations. So if you flip the slide, Stephen, just show off some of my work. I've been active on Tableau Public for the past 5 years. There's mostly, creative and visualizations I do just for fun. And a lot of them happen to be sports themed. So I really like, thinking of different questions, different topics, interesting insights that I like to pick out of data and share with the Tableau community and the sports community as well. The thing about sports is there's many different sports, and there's a lot of different questions, a lot of different answers and data that there is to dig into, and a lot of people follow and have interest in it. So I really like engaging with this community, thinking about different topics to share and chat about, and that's really what I looking forward to bringing to the community. Sharing different experiences in sports, but also the passion that I'm sure a lot of you bring as well. Looking forward to sharing that and getting going here. I also have the pleasure of introducing our third co-host. He is located in Brisbane, Australia, so he's most likely sleeping right now. As I mentioned, this is a global Tableau user group, so we're going to aim to switch up the time zones of our events that we have in the future, so that not everyone is watching a recording. So we're, if you're watching and recording, fear not, we're aiming to have some APAC events, some events in the Europe time zones as well, just so that everyone has a live event here and there. But Frederick, he works in the retail industry. But when he moved to Australia, he used data visualization to explore sports that he didn't really know a lot about, such as Aussie rules football. He is also the co-lead of the Brisbane Tableau user group, and also the director of Biz for Social Good, and he's a Tableau ambassador as well. Favorite sports, football, marathon running, and one of his favorite athletes is the great Zinedine Zidane, which you'll see in some of his visualizations on the next slide. One that I really like from Frederick is his 1,000 runs visualization, both the design of it, but he did 1,000 runs over 10 years. It's an amazing feat. And then also you see one there for Zinedine Zidane, and then the one on the right there on Aussie rules football. So Frederick is really involved in the Tableau community. We're really happy to have him on board. And in one of our APAC-based events, we'll have him introduce himself to you all live, so you'll get to meet him then. And now I think Mo is next, so I'll pass it off to Mo for his introduction.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Hello, everybody. My name is Mo. I'm based in London in the UK, and I work as a senior analyst at the UK Sports Institute, which means that I help elite sports in the UK, particularly Olympic and Paralympic sports, use their data to help the athletes go faster, perform better, and also to stay healthy. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, so I'll leave something in the tank for that. Sports was also my way into the Tableau community. So before I kind of started to get involved in a big way like I am now, I kind of wanted to get involved, and I started contributing to a small little initiative called Sports for Sunday, which is still going. Cheeky shout out plug. I'm one of the co-leads for that. And it was a great way to both practice my skills, but also to start to get tips and build connections and relationships with other people who are also passionate about sports. As Stephen said, one of the things that really brings us together here is a passion for sport. It's something that we love doing, and I'm lucky enough to be able to work in it, but I would definitely still be making these visualizations otherwise, because it is just something that I've always been involved in and something I've always enjoyed. Some favorite sports of mine: I'm a badminton player, quite a keen badminton player. I play competitively here in the UK, and I also quite like watching a bit of kayak cross, which, if you caught it on the Olympics, is the completely insane 4-person down a white water course in kayaks around inflatable gates. Yeah, I just think it's brilliant. It's an incredible watch, and it looks like great fun. And also sport climbing. I think, like a lot of people, I've done a little bit of bouldering. I used to do a little bit of lead climbing, so where you're top roped, when I was younger as well. Nothing too serious, just for fun in both accounts. And again, I love watching that competitively. I think some of the things they're able to do is absolutely unbelievable. And it was great to watch Toby Roberts get a gold medal at the Olympics as well in the boulder lead combined. A few favorite athletes. Generally, I like people who are incredibly good at what they do and manage to tread the line between knowing how good they are, so there's no kind of false modesty going on, but they're not pushing it in everyone's face. So Simone Biles, obviously an absolute goat. She is incredible. Mondo Duplantis in the same area. And then Noah Lyles, who I really like because he's got an incredible amount of self-confidence and self-belief. And he actually manages to demonstrate that as well. So he's constantly calling out other people for not being able to deliver, but he actually can deliver kind of on what he says he thinks he's going to be able to do, which at that level is quite an impressive thing, because it's a very unpredictable, I mean, sport is a very unpredictable space. So being able to consistently deliver on what you're saying you're going to do and you're making big claims is, I think, pretty cool. Right.
Well said.
Thank you very much. So here's a few of my visualizations. Things that you'll see on my profile: lots of small multiples. I love them. I'm an addict. And also I try and build everything with map layers because I like that too. So you'll see probably quite a lot of fairly complex stuff. I also quite like a little bit of abstract things. For me, part of the real joy of being able to use Tableau for sports kind of in my hobby is an opportunity to do things that I don't actually get an opportunity to do at work. So I do a lot of less narrative-based stuff in Tableau Public, a lot more kind of choose your own narrative style things. sometimes there'll be a theme I want to bring out, but I really like to enable whoever's looking at it to kind of come to their own conclusions about what they're looking at and to think about what they're doing. And then a cheeky shout out up in the top left for my local non-league football club, Walthamstow, who are semi-professional in this country, which still makes them so much better than I am. But they don't have access to the sort of data that Premier League football teams have. And so it's kind of just a bit of a passion for me to just see what I can do with the little bits of data that are available, and then chuck that up on Tableau as well, just for a bit of fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, I love the choose your own sort of storylines, but awesome. So we'll get to, and it's a good segue now to the Q&A, of course. So again, thanks for being open to me sort of putting you in the hot seat. So I thank you. So I guess we can just kick off, maybe like tell us a bit about your role and the impact you make at the UK Sports Institute.
Yeah, so a bit of background as well. I don't imagine anyone in here has heard of the UK Sports Institute unless you were talking to me about it beforehand in some capacity. UK Sports Institute was established in 2002, and we are providing sports medicine and sports science services to sports within the UK. As I mentioned earlier, primarily that's Olympic and Paralympic sports, and we cover all of them, summer, winter, wherever they are based across the country. And we also do some work with some kind of outside sports as well, netball, for example, and some others. In that kind of sports medicine, sports science banner, we provide a lot of practitioners and a lot of expertise for sports. So that can be around kind of athlete health, so physiotherapists, doctors, performance innovation, who are a more very kind of forward-thinking research development kind of prototype guys. Some of the stuff they do is really cool. And latterly, we've started doing performance data. So this is in recognition of the fact that data is becoming a bigger part of everybody's world, and specifically a much bigger part of the sporting environment. And in order to kind of gain a competitive advantage, we needed to really be able to start to specialize on people who had data skills. That's where I come in to some extent. So my role as the senior analyst is kind of threefold, really. I help to shape what good analysis looks like across the organization. So that doesn't have to be just for data specialists. That can be for anyone working with data. So that's kind of helping to create a data community so that we've got connections for people to be able to talk to each other, helping lead on kind of technical skills and soft skills, and kind of show people what I think is the more effective way to be able to have impact with things. I also get involved in bespoke projects. So this is kind of smaller scale things with the sports or with practitioners themselves, usually answering relatively contained questions. So it could be around looking at the relationship between a qualifying round and then a knockout round for a sport where they qualify and then compete in knockout rounds at the events, something like that. And then I also lead on looking at our kind of injury and illness surveillance work. We're very fortunate to have an incredibly rich data set around kind of the medical records of our athletes, and we're constantly looking for new ways to make sure that we can keep our athletes as healthy as possible, reduce their injury and illness burden, but also share that with other people. This is something that a lot of sports globally don't necessarily have access to. A lot of practitioners might just be working with a handful of athletes somewhere in a totally different country, and we want to be able to try and make sure that we're putting research out there that gives them something else to work with as well, whether that's a comparison so they can see whether what they're experiencing is similar to what we're experiencing, or whether it's lessons that we've learned over the many years of kind of data that we've got and we've been collecting. So that's kind of a brief whisk over kind of what I do, I suppose, in the environment that I work in.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. That's really interesting. It seems like there's a wide sort of breadth of things that you do. So were you, just out of curiosity, I'm assuming you were very busy during the Olympics, or is it more pre-work versus on the day?
Yeah, for me, actually, it's mostly pre-work. So because I work on more of a project basis, or what we call a system-wide basis, so looking at all of the sports kind of overall, like medical records and stuff. Mm-hmm. As the sports start to get closer towards the games and they start to protect their environment and their protocols, I actually end up then with a little bit less work to do. Some of my colleagues who are embedded in sports, so they'll work either full-time or kind of part of the time specifically in that sport with those practitioners day to day, they obviously then get super, super busy because their job kind of never lets up. And then the closer you get to a major competition, then the more intense kind of it becomes to make sure that you're there kind of working through, they're on top of everything, and they can help answer any ad hoc questions that might be popping up. So,
Right, of course.
yeah, so it's a little bit easier for me than for some of my colleagues.
Right. Yeah. Well, easy is always relative. It just depends when, I suppose. But no, that makes sense. That's interesting. Can you maybe tell us about like a challenge or like a problem that maybe you encountered, and how you approached the problem to address it? And I think when we spoke before, it was that you move around to different sports as well. Like you don't sort of specialize in the sport. So I don't know. Because of that, I'm assuming you have several stories around that, but that's just an assumption. So
yeah, I'd say that actually captures what the biggest challenge often is, which I would call domain expertise, and specifically my lack of domain expertise. So I'm not a sports scientist or a physiotherapist or a doctor or a coach by training or by background. That's not been my experience. And there is less so now because I've been involved in it for a long time, but certainly kind of when I first started, and I still get it now to now, there's a lot I don't know about how these practitioners actually do their jobs and how they leverage the relationships they have, both with the athlete, with the coach, with the other practitioners, but also just the pragmatic things of what the data means. And I think this is kind of transferable in business as well. You know, you might be working kind of, let's say you might normally work with finance data, but now you're working with marketing data. You might not necessarily know what it means, but it's a little bit more intuitive. Whereas for me, if I then sit down with a practitioner and start working with them on something that they're recording, they could be talking about really specific kind of physiotherapy measurements and practices, you know, range of motion for different hip flexion tests and things like that. And that's stuff that I don't know what it is. And it's not particularly easy necessarily for me to be able to intuit what it is. And that means that I just have to be very rigorous and very careful that I am kind of staying within the boundaries of what I know. And also that I am looping in people who have that domain expertise. And I mean, that's just generally a pretty good tip, but very, very specifically in the world of sport, where you get a lot of people with very different skills and backgrounds, very different responsibilities, working together as a single team, being able to always think about who needs to be involved at what point, because they understand that bit of data, or because they are actually going to be the person tasked with making those changes, is really important. And kind of being able to proactively engage those people as well, so that they know what's going on and that they can contribute and they can help steer what you're doing, I think is incredibly important.
So the solution, I guess, is just to ensure, if you have let's say a knowledge gap, try to ensure that knowledge gap is filled, whether it's with a person or asking tons of questions, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and about being really kind of humble and honest about it. That can feel really confrontational, I think, particularly in, you know, where I work, like a very elite environment where we're working with the best athletes and the best practitioners in the country. Sometimes it can feel really exposing to put your hand up and say, sorry, I don't actually know what that means. Can you explain it to me? But actually, everybody likes answering questions. Nobody likes asking questions. And that's true for the people I work with, as it is going to be true for everyone, I think. And it's about kind of being able to kind of keep that, I suppose, internal courage and that awareness of what you don't know, so that you're not guessing, and be able to say, actually, sorry, I didn't quite understand. You know, could we take 10 minutes and just walk me through it again? Yeah, and very much about kind of just keeping that view and thinking about who might be able to contribute that knowledge to the experiment.
Yeah, that's a great point. It reminds me reminds me of that time, or the project I had with the racing car team. It was just that, like, I didn't have that domain knowledge, sat down with them, asked them tons of questions to at least sort of bridge that gap, and ultimately it worked out. But no, that's great. That's really interesting. That's all we have time for now. I see you do have a couple questions in the chat as well, so I'm assuming other people will have more questions. So I'll give it so Mo, no pressure on answering them, but hopefully you can take a couple minutes to answer them. But thank you for that. Really appreciate it, Mo. Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. So over next up, we have the main event. So we have a wonderful colleague of Ryan and I's named Maggie, who's the designer extraordinaire. We're very happy to have her because of her skill set, her amazing abilities as well. So I'll hand it over to Maggie, because who better to introduce herself, her than herself, of course.
Thank you, Stephen. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Maggie. I'm part of the visual analytics team along with Stephen and Ryan. My role is a senior designer, so a lot of my time on projects that I work with the clients is typically gathering the business user requirements and translating that into wireframes and design of the actual dashboards that are then going to be developed and then delivered back to the client. Stephen, can you stop sharing and then I'll start sharing the deck?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Transition. Again, the music is needed, but we're ironing out kinks. No worries, people.
Okay, let me know when you can see my screen. I'll just go into the slideshow mode as well. Okay, great. So I am located in Toronto. You guys can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm located in Toronto, Canada. My favorite sports, so it's doing figure skating and watching is figure skating. And on a weekly basis, I play recreational volleyball, and that's been really fun. And my favorite athlete is Yoona Kim, who's a Korean figure skater. And just like Simone Biles is in gymnastics, Yoona Kim is the ultimate GOAT in figure skating. I don't care who else disagrees. Okay. So jumping into what I'll be presenting. So today I'll be walking through how to craft a golden data viz, or at least how we've crafted a golden data viz. So this is really focusing on applying a design approach in our visualization. So just some quick background in terms of what our viz is. So we did participate in a Deloitte Viz game competition here, and which is an annual data visualization competition organized and hosted by Deloitte and Salesforce. And what was really special about this year's one is the fact that we had a guest judge from the IOC be part of the judging panel. So who participated? It was open to all Deloitte members of all skill levels. So those who have barely dabbled, who haven't dabbled into data visualization, or for those like us who have been veterans and are pretty well versed in data viz and development in Tableau. So from the competition, there were 588 participants and from 38 countries, just given Deloitte as a global a global firm. There's quite a lot of folks that came from all over the world. So I think the finalists, like the 4 top teams, ended up being 2 from Canada, 1 from Ireland, and then another one from Greece. So it was really cool to see that how much data viz has been spread out across the firm in Deloitte alone. And as I mentioned, our guest judge was from the IOC, and so the theme of our viz is around celebrating the Olympics. Okay. So the judging criteria that we had to follow is they were going to judge around design, so making sure that we had an appropriate design for the story that is being told. Storytelling, so is there a clear story being told or a question being explored within our viz, as well as the analysis. So how sophisticated and appropriate is the data that is being used for the story. And just for this competition, in terms of timelines, we started in early February and then ended with the submission March 3rd. And then that's when they announced who were the top 4 teams that were then brought back for a grand finale later in March, so March 21st, to present to a panel of judges. And I guess you guys already know, but the dream team were Stephen, who is taking lead on the story, Ryan, who took the lead on development of our viz, and myself, who is took lead on the design of the viz. Okay, so just before we actually dive into the viz, did want to focus on just giving you high-level overview of our approach. So the very first thing that we did was really focus on the story. So decide on an overall structure of the story of what we wanted to tell. And that was very much just brainstorming and ideating the three of us together for that first week after the kickoff date. Second week, that's when we focused on, after we've aligned on a general story structure, we started gathering the data, the appropriate data to be able to support that story. So that was really the major focus on week 2, and that we were looking, Googling a bunch of things, doing a lot of research in terms of finding a lot of sport or social issue publications to be able to get the appropriate data. And then finally, and this is kind of overlapping from once we figured out what our story was all the way up to right before development, was doing the design. So that was my responsibility in wireframing all of the visuals and figuring out all the different interactive elements that were needed for our viz. And then finally, that last week was all thrown to Ryan to actually develop the dashboard and doing a lot of troubleshooting along the way. Okay. So before we even got to our story, is the number one and most important thing to do when it comes to any viz project is knowing who your audience is or who your user is. So pretty early on, we did know who ultimately would be that judging panel. And so we knew there was going to be representatives from Tableau, Deloitte, as well as the guest judge from the IOC. And that kind of helped, knowing who our audience was, our main audience was, that kind of helped guide what were different elements of our viz that we needed to make sure that we hit in order to ultimately present what an award-winning viz, as some might say. So number one was figuring out what kind of story we wanted to tell. And that really it helped the fact that we knew that we were going to be presenting to the vice president of the Tableau community, as well as the associate director from the IOC. So we wanted to make sure that we crafted an Olympic positive story, and that ultimately, knowing that we were going to be publishing on Tableau Public, we wanted to also make sure that it was widely received by the general public and any sports fans that might stumble upon our viz and on Tableau Public. And then also knowing that we were going to have Stefan Popowitz, who's our visual analytics leader at Deloitte. We want to make sure that throughout the entire design that we're applying those visual analytics best practices, because that's something that he would be looking at. And finally, we knew that it was going to be the chief product officer from Tableau, who is also part of the judging panel. So we want to make sure in the back pocket is whatever design and user experience we wanted to do, we want to make sure that we found any opportunities to address them via Tableau features. Okay, so, and I think throughout our viz, most of the features was parameters as well as dynamic zoning, if I'm not mistaken, Ryan. Yep. So after we figured out sort of what that audience that we wanted to make sure we're designing for, the first step was figuring out, okay, what's our story? What's that Olympic positive story that we wanted to tell? So we did go through quite a lot of brainstorming and ideation, again, that first week of the time we had to work on this viz. And so what we ultimately decided on is we wanted to showcase athletes' accomplishments first, followed by a social issue that impacted that athlete, and then how the IOC and the Paris Olympics have addressed that social issue. So it was pretty much like a 3-step story that we applied 5 times. So in our viz, we won't go in full detail, like the whole story of our viz, but essentially we applied that 5 times for 5 different stories, 5 athletes, and 5 different social issues that the Olympics have addressed. And then here is just how that story ultimately came together. And again, this is just one of 5 that we did. And so as you can see, that's when the story started now guiding the visuals and the different elements in terms of that flow we want to lay out on our viz. So on the far, so I essentially have 2 views here. So there's the first view, which is like our first tab, and then view 2 would be our second tab. So in the first tab, that's when we were showcasing the athlete's accomplishment. So in this example here, this is our first story that we presented, and this is Nawal Al-Mutawakil as the athlete. And the social issue that we're presenting here is the gender equality. So we would start with her accomplishments listed below, followed by a social issue that impacted the athlete. And so this is where we would take an opportunity to show that athlete as a data point within the social issue that we're trying to present, followed by how the IOC had addressed that social issue. So this is what you'll see here on the right side of the first view. And then if we were to click on the second tab here, this is where it's focused on showing the Paris 2024, how they've actioned that social issue. And again, so this is just one story that we didn't apply it 5 times for 5 different stories for our entire viz. Okay. So now I'll actually jump into the Figma file. So Figma is a program that we use here to prototype, wireframe the designs for our viz. Let me just go to full screen. Okay. So what you see on screen, and I'll zoom in, is just all the different design elements or assets that were created for the viz. So the first couple of 3 rows here, so in the black, these ones were our main screens of our viz. So you would have the main background. As you can see, I'll zoom in here. So we had our main background. So this is really that main page that's always staying constant on the viz. We would have our introductions followed by the 5 different stories and different athletes that we're showcasing, and then getting into the conclusion. So it is a horizontal scroll we ended up doing to have that linear flow to go through the 5 different stories. And the reason we landed on 5 stories is because the Olympics, you had the 5 different Olympic rings put together. We just thought it was a great opportunity to have 5 stories, 5 colors representing the 5 athletes. Okay, so this was our main background. And then for the view 1 and view 2, we had different tab views, as you can see here, that were then created. And this is something that I was working very closely with Ryan, as he was the lead developer, to figure out what were the actual physical design assets that need to be created in order to meet the different Tableau features in terms of interactivity that needed to happen. So yeah, so there's a lot of go back and forth in terms of getting the design built and design created for the build of the actual viz. So along with these main tabs as well as the main background, we did have what I call, and this is why I put it in gray, our secondary design elements. So we did include a guide overlay on our viz. There were certain assets we had to create around if there are any opportunities where we wanted to expand charts. So I had to create what that expanded chart overlay would look like on top, as well as all the interaction buttons we wanted to include. So there, and I'll go once we get to the actual viz, but we do have a button that's dedicated to opening video for any opportunities we saw that we wanted to include any video sources, as well as resource buttons to open up essentially URL links to different resources we wanted to share. And then if there are any other pop-ups or hover overs we want to include, we then also create those buttons. Okay. So I know I went through pretty quickly, but at a high level, this is just to show all the nitty-gritty pieces that needs to be created in order to create what was the ultimate viz for this project. So now I will jump into the actual viz. I'll go on full screen. Okay, so this is the actual viz, and I'm just going to slowly scroll through. But this is how all those different elements put together looks like. So one thing I did want to flag was that, as you saw, a lot of the elements that were in the Figma, a lot of the elements that we have created were done in Figma. So we're all done separately outside of the actual Tableau. The only thing that was built native in Tableau, I believe, were just the charts. So if they're, I believe we're just the charts, and then the actual interactions were all out in Tableau. but everything else was all Figma. So I'm saying all the graphics, all the text, those were all done in Figma and then exported into images and then populated on the actual Tableau. And I'll just walk you through it. So, and then highlight any design elements that we had. So of course, first thing you notice is that we did refer to the IOC branding guidelines. So it was a fairly simple, quick Google IOC design guidelines, and it's pretty accessible. That's where I was able to get all the colors for our viz, as well as getting an understanding of what those graphics and design aesthetic that they followed. And so as you can see, in terms of the graphics and the way that they've been illustrated, that follows or pretty much close to what the IOC uses, because we knew who our audience was. We want to make sure that we did for that audience. Another thing, a big piece of this is I want to make sure, knowing that it's a pretty elaborate story where we have, again, 5 stories, same story, but done 5 times, is that I want to make sure everything was consistent. So visually, it is a lot, but visually I want to make sure that it was fairly easy to consume. So making every story the way that it's laid out consistent across. And then knowing that we were going to be using Olympic colors is using those consistently across. So then that way it just looks cohesive altogether. I did use a lot of white space and made sure to implement a lot of negative space in ours, just so it didn't look so cluttered. The other huge thing that I want to flag was the fact, and this is something I found out pretty close to the end of like my window of design, I think maybe 3 days before submission, and then we had to pivot, was the fact that we were going to do this horizontal scroll, as I didn't take into account that Tableau actually has a width limit of 10,000 pixels. And so when I had essentially finished the final first draft of all the images, it was beyond the 10,000 pixels. So I had to shrink and resize everything down to fit. And I think it got to like 9,940. So I got pretty close. But that's just something to keep in mind as you're figuring out your design. And don't do what I did, is wait till the last minute to figure that out, is knowing what are your actual physical limitations with Tableau. So that was a huge one, was that max width in Tableau was 10,000 pixels. So I had to shrink everything down to fit into that limit there. Yeah, so essentially they're also on top of that, there's also different interaction elements I want to highlight. So the one I mentioned you saw in the Figma file was that user guideline overlay. This is something I thought was really important to include, just given the size of our viz, and it's not the most simple viz to get through. So this is really to highlight what we saw as like the flow that the user should go and all the different interaction points. So there's that video button we want to show. We did include info buttons as a hover over so that they could always refer to what source we were using for our charts. And then we did have, for a couple charts, we have allow the users the option to be able to expand that visualization just to get a little bit closer to the data points. So we did include that, and I'll close it again. And then I'll show you some of those interaction points that were highlighted in that overlay. So we did have the video. So here we have it in full screen. And then that way, so for each of the athletes, we did include a video, because we really wanted to showcase the athlete, and what better way, at least the second best thing than actually meeting them in person is seeing them on screen and in action. So that we made sure to include that for every athlete as part of that highlight section. And then expand here. So for this one, we wanted to highlight that Nawal El Mutawakil was a data point within all the Moroccan athletes in the Summer Olympics for, I believe, what was it, 1984. So we allowed the users to be able to expand onto that, and then we could highlight that in 1984 she was the only woman that represented Morocco. Okay. And then we can collapse that. Another huge part of the flow is, of course, the tabbing. So by default, all of the different story sections start with on the first tab. So this is really looking at gender equality and how the Olympics have adjusted just in general. So mostly the IOC, but then the user can select that second tab, which then now focuses on the content and story around how Paris 2024 had addressed that social issue. So in case of gender equality, and I'm sure most of you know, is that this is the first Olympics that was 50-50 women and male athletes that participated. And along with that, I want to also highlight just the last piece, which is for each of the different Paris 2024 tabs, we include a resource that provided more information on how they actioned that social issue. Okay, so, oh, sorry, go back here. Go back to full screen. Yeah, so in all, that was most of the interaction points I wanted to highlight, but I'll go through the viz again. So again, the first one we did focus on Nawal El Mutawakil and gender equality, Yulimar Rojas and LGBTQI plus inclusion, Esther Vigir and representation of disabilities, Clara Hughes and mental health support, and then finally Chloe Kim, environmental sustainability. So of course, we're not going through all this in detail, but I highly recommend or encourage all of you to check out. I believe Stephen or Ryan will definitely share the link over to you to take a look. And yeah, I think that is it. I'll jump back to the deck. Actually, I'll pause. Are there any questions or comments around the design, the process around this viz, since I still have it here on screen? I don't know if it's just on chat.
Yeah, no question.
I think we can take questions. I think we have a slide for questions,
sorry,
right?
We do? Okay.
Yeah, we do, but it's okay.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll just jump back to the deck then. Okay, so really the big key takeaways I want all of you to get out of is really the important part is knowing your audience. And once you figured out who your audience is or who your user is for your viz, then it's making sure that you craft that story appropriate to them. And along with that is finding that appropriate data. So really spend the time to get the right data that will support your story. And that is something I know throughout our process of getting to where we were at. We did spend a lot of time in making sure, and sometimes we thought we found the right data, and then as we were also kind of molding what that story was, we realized that data set wasn't necessarily relevant anymore, so then we would have to scrap it and then try to find again. So it was a lot of going back and forth, and as it wasn't like we finished the story, then we were able to get to the data, then we were able to get to the design. Like some of it, we got the general structure of our story to help guide what sort of data we were looking for. But of course, we may have had to modify the story with whatever ends up being available data-wise. So, but all in all, I think what we did land on was pretty close to what we had ultimately started with in terms of like a high-level story. So again, craft your story, like take the time to craft your story, find the appropriate data. A big learning opportunity for me was making sure that I understand those Tableau capabilities. So again, I had highlighted the 10,000 pixel max width that I had to deal with quite late into the game, and then having to pivot and resize everything. So that was tough to get through. But yeah, as you're figuring out your design, you want to make sure that you understand what are those Tableau capabilities up front to know what you're working with, and then applying those design best practices. So I know I went through it high level, but hopefully as you see it, then you'll also be able to see what sort of were the design elements that I applied on the viz. And then also in this, and then I'm sure we'll share the deck out to you, or just different resources, great resources in terms of looking at improving or applying more design principles into your viz. So I have a few around data visualization examples, a palette generator, how to apply Gestalt psychology principles in data visualization, which again applies to a lot of, overlaps with a lot of design best practices, and then some books for those who are interested in, reading up on some information design or data viz. Okay. And I think that gets to our actual questions piece. I don't know if anyone can just unmute themselves, or is it all just through chat?
Yeah, it would all be through chat. So if there's any questions, you can.
Oh, okay.
Any questions at all about for Mo or for anything at all, feel free to throw it in the chat and we can address it here in the call.
I see one already there. A couple now. I can read them if you'd like, just for the recording as well. So Maggie, how did you plan and track your decisions and progress within the team across the story design and development?
So because this is our day-to-day, we pretty much knew our general at high level what needed to get done, what the different activities that need to get done to get into development. So just going back to the overall approach here. Sorry, let me go back to full screen. This aligns pretty closely to how we would go about doing like any client work when it comes to a dashboard. So knowing the story, so getting understanding of what those different use cases the client wants to come out of, then making sure that they do have the appropriate data to support that, whether it's, and doing like a whole availability assessment to see what's available and what's not, and then doing the actual design. So yeah, at a very high level, we did actually have, we also used Miro to just be our brainstorming whiteboarding tool. And we actually had a calendar, but there again, a very high level was just like week 1, we want to focus on the story, making sure we figure out like what our true narrative is going to be. Week 2 is getting all the data that's required to support that narrative. And then of course, design kind of overlaps across all weeks. And then we had make sure that week was saved for Ryan to actually do the development. How to track your decisions? I don't know if we tracked decisions per se, just kind of overlap, but we did. I highly recommend everyone, if it's not Miro, like some sort of whiteboarding tool to just be very, what's the like kind of free form in terms of ideation and brainstorm. I think that helped us a lot, just given how quick we had to move, and also how quick we had to move and making decisions. And at least we had everything kind of, dumped on some visual board for us to stay aligned on everything. Yeah. And then, sorry, hopefully I answered your question.
I think so. I think the other thing I want to quickly mention as well is at least how we approach it and how I've approached it in past, let's say, sports projects too, is like the story, the data, and design is very much like front end. And like for us, it was really important to get all of those questions answered before developing, which is just simply executing. So I just wanted to add that in. We have about 1 or 2 minutes left, but so I see another question. This is a Figma specific one. So Maggie, it's all you. What steps did you take to keep it so well organized, especially the Figma file? Yeah,
so I will be totally honest with you. It is not. This is specifically for the presentation today, but I will gladly go through what the actual Figma file looks like. And it is not organized. So I'll actually zoom out so you can see what I was working with. So this is kind of how I like to work, is an organized mess, some people might say. So again, these are just past like variations of the different versions that I had created. You see graphics kind of flying here and there. But yeah, ultimately at the end, I'll just take what ultimately were the final pieces that need to put together and then put in a separate page. So this is what you saw as the organized. piece. But I'm typically not the most organized. I don't necessarily encourage any of you to be like that, but yeah, I'm just being totally honest here.
Yeah, awesome. And then one final question I think we only have time for from Michael. So how many hours did we dedicate to the project each day? I forget exactly how many hours, but we did do a bit.
Yeah, I mean, if it's 9 to 5 was, you know, our real job, and then 5 to 11 midnight was this, at least for me. It was, I want to say if like 40 hours a week is normal, I want to say probably half. So 40 times 4, 120. So maybe 60 hours, if not more, because we also worked on weekends, like full overtime.
Yeah, I will say it was early on it wasn't as crazy, but then as obviously progressively, like I know for the last week it was, yeah, like we were working on this till 11, and then on the weekends it was all day, and yeah, so definitely a lot of hours. Yeah, awesome, thanks. I think those are all the questions that we have. Maggie, do you mind going back to the deck as well for the questions? Oh, not quite. No.
Oh, sorry, I went for a
All good, all good. Yeah. Just to wrap things up quickly, do you mind going to the next slide as well? So, of course, if anyone is interested in speaking at one of our events and being one of the main people to sort of give a presentation, of course, please fill out our speaker interest form. Like, we'd love to have people speak about it, about anything that they're passionate about around sports. Yeah, so please fill it out if you're interested. Of course, stay tuned for more. Yeah, we'll be announcing the next speaker hopefully momentarily for our next event, which we'll plan in November. Actually, yeah, sorry, go to the next slide. I didn't mention. Yeah, perfect. So yeah, thank you so much everyone for their time. Stay tuned for more information in November. And again, thank you everyone for the time. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Mo. Thank you, Maggie, for all being amazing, co-leads and guests as well. So really appreciate your time, the effort, everything. So thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. Have a good day, everyone.